Let me stick with this coronavirus and how you have had the truth kept from you. More than 3 million people now around the world have died so far from this coronavirus, and the lives of billions of people have been totally disrupted. I mean, look at your own. And the extraordinary thing is that we still do not know how this virus started. Or let me be more accurate, we are still not told how this virus started. Was it a natural outbreak? No one to blame. Or did it in fact escape from a Chinese laboratory? And then we do have someone to blame. I raise this again because of a brilliant new article in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, which says too many people want to keep from you the truth. That fact, that the evidence now strongly suggests that this virus was created by Chinese scientists who then let it escape. Now, as the article makes clear, I mean, top virologists don't want you to know this, because this is in fact the kind of lethal research that they've been working on as well, to make viruses more lethal, to supposedly then discover better treatments. Some top American science bureaucrats don't want you to know either, because they were actually funding this virus work at China's Institute of Virology in Wuhan, exactly where this pandemic started. What are the odds? And obviously China doesn't want you to know, because then the world will hold it to account, demand some compensation. And of course, there were also all the Trump-hating journalists who did not want you to even think that US President Donald Trump was actually right when he said this virus did escape from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Nonsense, said our ABC.
So how likely is it that the virus escaped from that Chinese lab? Well, in short, it's not, despite concerns expressed by the Americans in 2018 about lax standards, and despite what President Trump has been saying.
Now, if blaming China now sounds like a conspiracy theory, note that even President Joe Biden's new head of national intelligence says, yes, this virus could have escaped from that Chinese lab, and US agencies are checking that out.
It is absolutely accurate. The intelligence community does not know exactly where, when, or how COVID-19 virus was transmitted initially. But we're continuing to work on this issue and collect information.
And ask yourself, as this new paper does so brilliantly, and I urge you to look it up on the web, of all the places in the world where this brand new coronavirus breaks out, a virus that is immediately very well adapted to killing humans, that looks nothing like what we've seen in other coronaviruses, that comes without warning, that has features you don't actually expect in a coronavirus without genetic engineering. What are the odds that that kind of virus broke out accidentally in exactly the city with an institute that's working to create exactly this kind of virus, and in a lab that had poor safety procedures, and in a dictatorship that now won't let investigators see the original medical records of the very first people to get infected? As I said, this is a brilliant new article, goes through the science and points the finger right at China. Its author is Nicholas Wade, a science writer who's worked on the journals Nature and Science, prestigious ones, and for many years the New York Times. His book, Before the Dawn, won a Science in Society Journalism Award, and I spoke to Nicholas Wade a short time ago. Nicholas Wade, thank you so much for joining me. There are two competing theories about how this virus started. Either it's naturally out there through a host animal or whatever, or in a Chinese laboratory in Wuhan. Which of those two possible theories is the easiest to explain? Which best fits the facts as we know them so far?
Well, I think the first thing one should say is that there is no direct evidence for either theory, so one can't come to a firm conclusion. But you can say that if you apply various tests at how well do each of these two theories explain the available data, it seems to me that the balance of probability is fairly firmly in favor of this virus having come from the lab at Wuhan.
Well, first tell us why the Wuhan Institute of Virology was doing research into viruses, of which one like this may well have been and escaped, and why the United States was funding it.
Well, the first question is much easier to answer than the second. It's a real puzzle as to why the National Institutes of Health in the US was funding this research during a moratorium on such funding. But to go back to your first question, the Chinese virologists were doing the same as virologists all around the world. They were doing a very dangerous category of experiments called gain of function. And that's where you soup up a natural animal virus to try and see what sort of few tweaks it might need to become a human pathogen. And the rationale for this is, well, if we can get a few steps ahead of nature, then that will help us prevent the next pandemic. So in the Wuhan lab, they were taking bat coronaviruses, that's the same kind as the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and they were swapping in and out the spike protein from related coronaviruses. So the spike protein is more or less what determines the host that the virus can attack. And they were trying to get a virus that was most infective for humans. Now, they weren't testing it out on human subjects, of course, but they were testing it out on humanized mice. That's mice that are genetically engineered to carry the cells of the human airway. And that would explain one of the surprising facts about the SARS-CoV-2 virus is that right from the start, it was very well adapted to attack human cells. And that's in contrast to most viruses when they come over from animals. It takes them sort of many tries before they get it right and become really good human pathogens.
And that, of course, helps to explain one of the most curious facts that there are no hospital records of people coming in with milder forms of this virus before it sprung almost like fully formed. And I'm just wondering, it seems an enormous risk to take, souping up a virus that would kill humans in order to, on the off chance have a cure or a vaccine down the track. You must be so careful then if you're going to do that sort of research. What were the safety precautions at the Wuhan Institute of Virology actually like?
Well, they did have the highest of these 4 safety level labs. It's called BSL 1, 2, 3, and 4. And 4 is the highest, which you use for really dangerous things like Ebola. And all around the internet, you can see these photographs of Dr. Zhengli Shi, the chief Chinese scientist, or Bat Lady, as she called. She was an expert in coronaviruses. She's wearing this bubble suit and working in a BSL-4 lab, so it all looks like it was safe. But in fact, all her experiments were done in a much lower level of safety, about the level required in a U.S. dentist's office, according to one description. That's BSL 2, and basically you just put up a notice saying biohazard, and you wear gloves and a coat. So if in the course of her experiment she created a virus that was far more infectious than she had expected, and given the fact that she had tried but failed to develop a vaccine against the viruses she was working with, it will be no surprise if the virus had escaped from her lab. And since the pandemic did indeed break out in Wuhan, of all the places in China it could have broken out, is Wuhan at the doorstep of the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And this seems to be hardly a coincidence.
Well, you mentioned that the virus was peculiarly effective in attacking humans. One of the things you point out in your article is that it possessed what's called a furin cleavage site. Now, for a non-science audience, what exactly is that? Why does it help the virus attack humans? And could such a thing have occurred naturally? This furin cleavage site occurred naturally in a virus that's sort of, mutating or whatever in host animals?
So the furin cleavage site is a tiny little part of the virus's anatomy, and it's positioned right in the middle of the spike protein. and it helps the spike protein break apart, which it has to do before it invades the human cell. Bat coronaviruses of the family to which SARS-CoV-2 belongs do not have a furin cleavage site. They get into bat cells by a different mechanism. So it's a big problem as to where SARS-CoV-2 acquired the furin cleavage site. Now, usually viruses do this by what's called recombination. That's when two viruses invade the same cell, and by accident they are assembled with bits and pieces belonging to the other virus. But you can only gain a furin cleavage site if some other virus in your group has one, and that is not the case. It's not proof. Evolution does all kinds of things we don't expect, but it just makes it very likely when you take it in conjunction with all the other evidence that this is a virus manipulated in the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
Well, given that, why were so many virologists so quick, so soon, to say that this virus was in fact natural, and the idea that it came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, that was just a conspiracy theory? In February last year already, I mean, the virus had only been a few weeks out, creating havoc that, at least as far as the world could tell. A group of scientists wrote in The Lancet, "We stand together to strongly condemn conspiracy theories suggesting that COVID-19 does not have a natural origin." Why would they have said that?
Well, there are two answers. One is that the viruses, virologists in general, they're an international community. They write for the same journals, they attend the same conferences. There will be tremendous blowback from the public if this virus turned out to have been created in a lab, because they were all doing, well, not many of them in many countries have been doing this kind of experiment for 20 years in what seemed to be very insufficient safety conditions. So that's a general reason why virologists in general are not at all keen to discuss the possibility that the virus might have escaped from the lab. And second, this particular group of scientists you mentioned who wrote this letter in The Lancet, the letter we now know was organized by a man called Peter Daszak, who in fact funded the research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology via the grant from the NIH. The grant went from the NIH to Daszak to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So of course, if the virus had come from research he had funded, he would be potentially culpable for what had happened. So he had an acute conflict of interest. So you'd expect that to be declared to the Lancet readers. But no, the letter in fact concludes saying, we declare no conflict of interest.
That is just so extraordinary. Look, we could only touch the surface of a lot of the issues you raised here, in your article, which is completely damning. I urge readers to go to the site. We'll put up the link later. Nicholas Wade, thank you so much indeed for your time.
Thanks very much.